Welcome to Evolved Sun. I'm your host, Matt Finch, and in today's episode, you're going to be learning in detail some of the main reasons for why Earth is in such a messed up situation where we could be headed straight for World War III, headed right into nuclear holocaust, why we've had endless wars, decade after decade after decade seemingly, in the 21st century, in the 20th century, in the 19th century, etc. And this is going to be something really trippy, which hardly anybody on this entire planet knows about. And that is that a lot of the souls that are incarnate on Earth right now are not even native souls to Earth. Instead, a lot of the souls that are here on Earth are actually extraterrestrial souls that originated on Mars and a planet called Maldek. Yes, back in the day, there was a civilization on Mars of very warlike mind-body-spirit complexes. And there was a huge planet way back in the day called Maldek, and the entities there were also very warlike, and they actually ended up blowing up their planet. All the wars that Mars had, they just destroyed their atmosphere. But Maldek went so big on the war and hardcore advanced technology for war that they blew their planet to smithereens. And now on present-day Earth, billions and billions of souls are souls from Mars and Maldek that, since they made their planets inhospitable for the third density experience, they ended up getting transferred over to Earth to complete their third density cycle. What's a third density cycle? That just refers to the 7 densities or the 7 levels of our universe. These are levels of consciousness that all portions of the Creator, us, and everything, advance through, starting from first density and all the way into 7th density and then being absorbed back into the all. First density is fire, air, earth, and water. Second density is plants and animals and minerals and bacteria and viruses, those types of things. Third density is where we become self-conscious mind-body-spirit complexes. And third density is the density where we're supposed to make the choice, a moral orientation decision of whether we want to polarize in consciousness on the path of service to others or service to the all, love and acceptance, or service to self. Without love, without compassion, aka the negative path of polarization. The positive path of serving others, you're still serving yourself, but not at the expense of others. And the main thing is, you're accepting things as they are, and you're more oriented toward unity, and not infringing upon the free will of others. The negative path, or the left-hand path, is all about control and blocking the heart chakra, and serving the self to the detriment of other people, and infringing on others' free will, and viewing the self as superior to all other selves, and viewing the self as separate from all other selves and everything else, and ultimately seeking to have lots and ever more power and control and the enslavement of other selves. Moving on from third density, which is the density of the choice, that is where things get awesome. I'm not going to talk about that in this episode because it's already going to be a really long one, and I have a full episode planned on the 7 densities of consciousness coming up soon. I'm going to be using today several resources all about the Law of One and raw material, including the Raw Contact Resource Series, a concept guide by Gary Bean and Diana Roy of LL Research, which is the channeling group that did the raw contact in the early 1980s. Specifically from that, I'm going to be reading the sections on Mars and Maldek, which are both pretty short but very succinct sections. Additionally, I'm going to be using the website called theLawOfOne.info, where I'm going to be reading about 15 different quotes from the Law of One books that have to do with Mars and Maldek. And finally, I'm going to be using a very cool PDF created by S.Mandelker Ph.D. on the Earth and ET contact history, which is a bullet point written presentation on the timeline of the destruction of Maldek, the ruining of the atmosphere of Mars, both souls from Mars and souls from Maldek reincarnating on Earth to finish off their third density cycles, and more. But I'm just going to be focusing mostly on the Maldek and Mars and the unique, very atypical mixture of souls that we have currently on Earth that, according to Ra, is very unlike normal third density experiences in this solar system and even in this galaxy. And I feel like that's a good introduction to give you a preview of what we're going to be discussing today. And with that being said, let's now get into it. Maldek. According to Ra, what we know as the asteroid belt is the physical remains of a former planet which was home to active first, second, and third densities. There are various names by which this planet has been identified, but in certain quarters of Earth's history, perhaps some of which have been lost, it had the name of Maldek. The third density population of Maldek had a civilization somewhat similar to that of Atlantis, in that it gained much technological information and used it without care for the preservation of the planet, following the ways of warfare and service to self, which was sincerely believed to be service to others. The escalating devastation racked Maldek's biosphere and caused planetary disintegration. The people of Maldek were so traumatized by this occurrence that they were in what Ra called a social complex knot or tangle of fear, from which none escaped. As time passed, no one could reach or aid them. Eventually, members of the Confederation were able to reach them, untie the knot of fear, and help them to recall that they were conscious. Finally, able to undergo healing and review, the group decided to place upon itself a type of karmic alleviation and restitution. For this purpose, over 2 billion souls came into incarnation in Earth's third density in non-human, second density bipedal physical vehicles. These vehicles being one variety of several types of creatures collectively known as Bigfoot. Though it's not entirely clear, it seems that they retained a third density consciousness, utilizing the second density vehicle as a self-imposed limitation. The great majority of these entities have been able to work out the self-imposed limitations and rejoin the normal third density experience. Authors note, planetary tangle of fear. There can be no earthly understanding of an entire society existing unconsciously in the inner planes in a tangle of fear, for a time-space equivalent of thousands of our years. The only insight I've ever gained into what it might be like came by the way of the movie What Dreams May Come. In the film, a woman commits suicide. This causes her soul to become trapped in the inner planes, consumed by a darkness that causes her to forget that there was something other than pain and limited identity. Her character, like I imagine those of Maldek may have been, is not completely conscious. She is swallowed in a perpetual dream of sorrow, grief, and fear, incessantly looping through various sorrow or terror-filled scenarios to which her dream self falls constant victim. Her husband eventually dies as well and, upon entering life between life, desires to find his wife. Another character in this realm strongly discourages the husband's desire, indicating that he too could become entombed in the same misery and forget who he is. Being the hero of the story, however, he naturally ignores the warnings and attempts, successfully, to untangle her own knot of fear. Mars. The red planet, Mars, was home to active first, second, and third density vibrations. The tendencies of the native third density population toward warfare caused the atmosphere to become inhospitable before the end of its cycle. A Confederation group aided these entities by transferring them at the start of Earth's third density experience 75,000 years ago. This transfer was unusual in that the entity's genetic material was preserved, adjusted, and, through a sort of cloning process, transferred to Earth. Consequently, the quarantine of planet Earth was stepped up due to the assessment of the Guardians that the free will of those of Mars had been abridged. Authors note, history rhymes with itself. Don asks, I would like to know if the reason the nuclear energy was brought into this density 40 or so years ago had anything to do with giving the entities that were here, who had caused the destruction of Maldek, another chance to use nuclear energy peacefully rather than destructively. Is this correct? And Ra responds, "This is incorrect in that it places cart before horse, as your people say. The desire for this type of information attracted this data to your people. It was not given for a reason from outside influences. Rather, it was desired by your peoples. From this point forward, your reasoning is correct in that entities had desired the second chance, which you mentioned. It is interesting to consider that the mortal, fateful imbalances that ravaged and annihilated life on our two neighboring planets, destroying the biosphere of one and, for the other, the planet itself, are alive and with us today. We have the precarious situation of nuclear proliferation and the ever-present possibility of planetary destruction that it creates, coupled with the ongoing degradation, destruction, and unsustainable exploitation of our own biosphere. Ra's opinion seems to be that nuclear disarmament is less important than a fundamental reorientation of humanity toward a vision of love, peace, service to others, and spiritual development." Dawn asked, "Is there any danger of what happened to Maldek happening to Earth at this time?" Ra answers, "We feel this evaluation of your planetary mind-body-spirit complexes' so-called future may be less than harmless. We say only the conditions of mind exist for such development of technology and such deployment. It is the distortion of our vision understanding that the mind and spirit complexes of those of your people need orientation rather than the toys needing dismantlement, for are not all things that exist part of the Creator? Therefore, freely to choose is your honor duty." Moving along, I'm going to read some of the passages from the Law of One books that have to do with both Maldek and Mars, and how their warfare tendencies led to their planets becoming inhabitable, Maldek destroying theirs and Mars making it so there was no atmosphere. I'm also going to read some of the passages from the Law of One books that have to do with the timeline of these planetary destructions, so to speak, literally in one and figuratively in another one. I'm also going to read some sections on how the souls from Maldek and Mars ended up on Earth to be able to finish their third density cycles with us here on Earth, aka Terra, as they no longer had inhabitable planets for them to finish off their third density, so they had to go somewhere. In 10.1, Dawn says, "I think it would clarify things for us to go back to the time just before the transfer of souls from Maldek. See how the Law of One operated with respect to this transfer and why this was necessary. What happened to Maldek, or the people on Maldek, to cause them to lose their planet? How long ago did this occur?" And Ra says, "The peoples of Maldek had a civilization somewhat similar to that of the societal complex known to you as Atlantis, in that it gained much technological information and used it without care for the preservation of their sphere, following to a majority extent the complex of thought, ideas, and actions which you may associate with your so-called negative polarity, or the service to self. This was, however, for the most part, couched in a sincere belief thought structure which seemed to the perception of the mind-body complexes of this sphere to be positive and of service to others. The devastation that racked their biosphere and caused its disintegration resulted from what you call war. The escalation went to the furthest extent of the technology this social complex had at its disposal in the space-time present of the then time. The time was approximately 705,000 of your years ago. The cycles had begun much, much earlier upon this sphere due to its relative ability to support the first-dimensional life forms at an earlier point in the space-time continuum of your solar system. These entities were so traumatized by this occurrence that they were in what you may call a social complex knot or tangle of fear. Some of your time passed. No one could reach them. No beings could aid them. Approximately 600,000 of your years ago, the then existing members of the Confederation were able to deploy a social memory complex and untie the knot of fear. The entities were then able to recall that they were conscious. This awareness brought them to the point upon what you would call the lower astral planes, where they could be nurtured until each mind-body-spirit complex was able finally to be healed of this trauma, to the extent that each entity was able to examine the distortions it had experienced in the previous life illusion complex. After this experience of learned teaching, the group decision was to place upon itself a type of what you may call karma alleviation. For this purpose, they came into incarnation within your planetary sphere in what were not acceptable human forms. This, then, they have been experiencing until the distortions of destruction are replaced by distortions towards the desire for a less distorted vision of service to others. Since this was the conscious decision of the great majority of those beings in the Maldek experience, the transition of this planet began approximately 500,000 of your years ago, and the type of body complex available at that time was used. 10.3, Don asks, and have any of the Maldek entities transformed now? Are they now still second density, or are they forming some third density planet now? Ra says, the consciousness of these entities has always been third density. The alleviation mechanism was designed by the placement of this consciousness in second-dimensional physical-chemical complexes, which are not able to be dexterous or manipulative to the extent which is appropriate to the workings of the third-density distortions of the mind complex. 21.16, Don asks, when did the first call occur, and how did it occur? Ra says, the first call was approximately 46,000 of your years ago. This calling was of those of Maldek. These entities were aware of their need for rectifying the consequences of their action, and were in some confusion in an incarnate state as to the circumstances of their incarnation. The unconscious being aware, the conscious being quite confused. This created a calling. The Confederation sent love and light to these entities. In 59.5, Don says, just to clarify that, could you tell me approximately how many total mind-body-spirit complexes were transferred to Earth at the beginning of this last 75,000 period? Ra responds, the transfer, as you call it, has been gradual. Over 2 billion souls are those of Maldek, which have successfully made the transition. Approximately 1.9 billion souls have, from many portions of the creation, entered into this experience at various times. The remainder are those who have experienced the first 2 cycles upon this sphere, or who have come in at some point as wanderers, some wanderers having been in the sphere for many thousands of your years, others having come far more recently. In 10.6, Don says, then our present race is formed of a few who originally came from Maldek and quite a few who came from Mars. Are there entities here from other places? Ra says, there are entities experiencing your time-space continuum who have originated from many, many places, as you would call them, in the creation. For when there is a cycle change, those who must repeat then find a planetary sphere appropriate for this repetition. It is somewhat unusual for a planetary mind-body-spirit complex to contain those from many, many various loci, but this explains much, for you see, you are experiencing the third-dimensional occurrence with a large number of those who must repeat the cycle. The orientation, thus, has been difficult to unify, even with the aid of many of your teach learners. 9.18, Don asks, is there any particular race of people on our planet now who are incarnated here from second density? And then Ra says, there are no second density consciousness complexes here on your sphere at this time. However, there are 2 races which use the second density form. One is the entities of the planetary sphere you call Maldek. These entities are working their understanding complexes through a series of what you would call karmic restitutions. They dwell within your deeper underground passageways and are known to you as Bigfoot. The other race is that being offered a dwelling in this density by guardians who wish to give the mind-body-spirit complexes of those who are of this density at this time appropriately engineered physical vehicles, as you would call these chemical complexes, in the event that there is what you call nuclear war. Then we jump way ahead to 90.18, where Don says, there seems to have been created by this logos, to me anyway, a large percentage of entities whose distortion was toward warfare, in that we had the Maldek and the Mars experience and now Earth. It seems that Venus was the exception to what we could almost call the rule of warfare. Is this correct? And was this envisioned and planned into the construction of the archetypal mind? Possibly not with respect particularly to warfare, as we have experienced it, but to the extreme action to polarization in consciousness. And Ra responds, it is correct that the Logos designed its experiment to attempt to achieve the greatest possible opportunities for polarization in third density. It is incorrect that warfare of the types specific to your experiences was planned by the Logos. This form of expression of hostility is an interesting result, which is apparently concomitant with a tool-making ability. The choice of the Logos to use the life form with the grasping thumb is the decision to which this type of warfare may be traced. 59.4, Don says, at the end of the second major cycle, there were a few 100,000 people incarnate on Earth. There are over 4 billion incarnate today. Were the over 4 billion people who are incarnate today, were they in the Earth planes but not incarnate at that time? Or did they come in from elsewhere during the last 25,000-year cycle? Ross says, there were 3 basic divisions of origin of these entities. Firstly, and primarily, those of the planetary sphere you call Maldek, having become able to take up third density once again, were gradually loosed from self-imposed limitations of form. Secondly, there were those of other third density entrants or neophytes whose vibratory patterns matched the Terran experiential nexus. These then filtered in through incarnative processes. Thirdly, in the past approximate 200 of your years, you have experienced much visiting of the Wanderers. It may be noted that all possible opportunities for incarnation are being taken at this time due to your harvesting process and the opportunities which this offers. 9.6, Don asks, the people that we now have, the first people, like us, where did they come from? How did they evolve? Ra says, you speak of third density experience. The first of those to come here were brought from another planet in your solar system called by you the Red Planet, Mars. This planet's environment became inhospitable to third density beings. The first entities, therefore, were of this race, as you may call it, manipulated somewhat by those who were guardians at that time. 9.7, Don asks, what race is that, and how did they get from Mars to here? Ra responds, the race is a combination of the mind-body-spirit complexes of those of your so-called Red Planet, and a careful series of genetical adjustments made by the guardians of that time. These entities arrived, or were preserved, for the experience upon your sphere by a type of birthing which is non-reproductive, but consists of preparing genetic material for the incarnation of the mind-body-spirit complexes of those entities from the Red Planet. 9.8, Don says, then I'm assuming what you're saying is that the Guardians transferred the race here after the race had died from the physical as we know it on Mars. Is that correct? Ross says this is correct. 10.6, Don asks, then our present race is formed of a few who originally came from Maldek and quite a few who came from Mars. Are there entities here from other places? And Ra responds, and I already did this response a little bit earlier, but this information and dialogue is so dense, and it's such an important passage, I'm going to reread it. Ra responds, there are entities experiencing your time-space continuum who have originated from many, many places, as you would call them, in the creation. For when there is a cycle change, those who must repeat then find a planetary sphere appropriate for this repetition. It is somewhat unusual for a planetary mind-body-spirit complex to contain those from many, many various loci, but this explains much. For, you see, you are experiencing the third-dimensional occurrence with a large number of those who must repeat the cycle. The orientation, thus, has been difficult to unify, even with the aid of many of your teach learners. 14.3, Don asks, then what was the second density form? What did it look like? That became Earth-Man in the third density. What did he look like in the second density? Ra says, the difference between second and third density bodily forms would in many cases have been more like one to the other. In the case of your planetary sphere, the process was interrupted by those who incarnated here from the planetary sphere you call Mars. They were adjusted by genetic changing, and therefore there was some difference which was of a very noticeable variety rather than the gradual raising of the bipedal forms upon your second density level to third density level. This has nothing to do with the so-called placement of the soul. This has only to do with the circumstances of the influx of those from that culture. 18.20, Don asks, when did Yahweh act to perform the genetic changes that Yahweh performed? Ra responds, the Yahweh group worked with those of the planet you call Mars 75,000 years ago in what you would call the cloning process. There are differences, but they lie in the future of your time-space continuum, and we cannot break the free will law of confusion. The 2600 approximately time was the second time we correct ourselves. 3600 approximately the time of attempts by those of the Orion group during this cultural complex. This was a series of encounters in which the ones called Anak were impregnated with the new genetic coding by your physical complex means so that the organisms would be larger and stronger. 19.5, Don asks, when the first second density entities became third on this planet, was this with the help of the transfer of beings from Mars? Or were there second density entities that evolved into third density with no outside influence? Ra says, there were some second density entities which made the graduation into third density with no outside stimulus, but only the efficient use of experience. Others of your planetary second density joined the third density cycle due to harvesting efforts by the same sort of sending of vibratory aid as those of the Confederation send you now. This communication was, however, telepathic rather than telepathic vocal or telepathic written due to the nature of second density beings. 20.17, Don says, I'm assuming at the start of one of these cycles there could have been either a positive polarization that would generally occur over the 25,000 years or a negative polarization. Is the reason for the negative polarization and the shortening of the cycle the influx of entities from Mars who had already polarized somewhat negatively? Ra says, this is incorrect. There was not a strong negative polarization due to this influx. The lessening of the lifespan was due primarily to the lack of the building up of positive orientation. When there is no progress, those conditions which grant progress are gradually lost. This is one of the difficulties of remaining unpolarized. The chances, shall we say, of progress become steadily less. 2018, Don says, the way I understand it, at the beginning of this 75,000 year cycle, then, we have a mixture of entities. Those who have graduated from second density on Earth to become third density, and then a group of entities transferred from the planet Mars to incarnate into third density here. Is this correct? Ra says this is correct. 20.20, Don says, thank you. What percentage of the entities, roughly, who were in third density here at that time were Martian, and what percentage were harvested out of Earth's second density? Ra says, there were perhaps 1/2 of the third density population being entities from the red planet, Mars, as you call it, perhaps 1/4 from second density of your planetary sphere, approximately 1/4 from other sources, other planetary spheres whose entities chose this planetary sphere for third density work. 3014, Don says, can you give me a brief history of the metaphysical principles of the development of each of our planets around the Sun and their function with respect to evolution of beings? Ra says, we shall give you a metaphysical description only of those planets upon which individual mind-body-spirit complexes have been, are, or shall be experienced. You may understand the other spheres to be part of the Logos. We take the one known as Venus. This planetary sphere was one of rapid evolution. It is our native Earth, and the rapidity of the progress of the mind-body-spirit complexes upon its surface was due to harmonious interaction. Upon the entity known to you as Mars, as you have already discussed, this entity was stopped in mid-third density, thus being unable to continue in progression due to the lack of hospitable conditions upon the surface. This planet shall be undergoing healing for some of your space-time millennia. The planet which you dwell upon has a metaphysical history well known to you, and you may ask about it if you wish. However, we have spoken to a great degree upon this subject. The planet known as Saturn has a great affinity for the infinite intelligence, and thus it has been dwelled upon in its magnetic fields of time-space by those who wish to protect your system. The planetary entity known to you as Uranus is slowly moving through the first density and has the potential of moving through all densities. 90.18, we read this one a little bit earlier, but it's short and super important, and it bears repeating again. Don says, there seems to have been created by this logos, to me anyway, a large percentage of entities whose distortion was toward warfare, in that we had the Maldek and the Mars experience and now Earth. It seems that Venus was the exception to what we could almost call the rule of warfare. Is this correct, and was this envisioned and planned into the construction of the archetypal mind? Possibly not with respect particularly to warfare, as we have experienced it, but to the extreme action to polarization in consciousness. Ra says, it is correct that the Logos designed its experiment to attempt to achieve the greatest possible opportunities for polarization in third density. It is incorrect that warfare of the types specific to your experiences was planned by the Logos. This form of expression of hostility is an interesting result which is apparently concomitant with the tool-making ability. The choice of the Logos to use the life form with the grasping thumb is the decision to which this type of warfare may be traced. Alright, so at this point, we've covered the sections in the Raw Contact Resource Series on Maldek and Mars. We did the Law of One quotes on Maldek and Mars from the Law of One info website. Now I'm just going to give you a quick bullet point rundown of the timelines of Mars and Maldek and the current soul mixture on Earth, which is a mixture of native Earth souls, souls from Mars, souls from Maldek, and souls from several other, actually, third density planets, where these mind-body-spirit complexes didn't blow up or destroy their planets, but where they flunked out of their 75,000 year third density cycle, meaning they weren't able to graduate either service to self or service to others into fourth density out of 75,000 years reincarnating. So Earth is a continuation school. It's a school for people that either blew up their planets and thus flunked the grade, or just never made enough spiritual progress at moral orientation to graduate from their third densities. As a result, Earth is super messed up. We've got a gigantic number of 3D chronic repeater souls. Souls that either destroyed their planets or its inhabitability, or souls that just were stuck in what Ra calls the sinkhole of indifference, meaning they didn't polarize positively, serving others, or negatively, serving the self. Now we're at the very end, the very tail end of Earth's 75,000 year master cycle of third density, which is broken down into 3 major cycles of 25,000 years approximately each. So Earth is shifting to fourth density. Actually, the planet Earth, Terra, Gaia, the entity being the planet, has already technically shifted into the first light of fourth density. However, due to the collective consciousness and what humanity's like right now with all the division and anger, and there's mass shootings and robberies and hatred and separation and on, it's just we are in a really destructive path. So the humans here have not shifted with the Earth, and so there's this crazy mismatch going on. But coming up eventually in the future, I have no idea how soon, I think Ra said somewhere between maybe 100 and 700 years, Earth and the mind-body-spirit complexes on Earth will all be fourth density, positive, which is the density of love or understanding. That, I believe, is what Jesus referred to when he talked about the kingdom of heaven. Our lifespans are much longer there. Everything is blissful for the most part. There's no veil of forgetting between the conscious and unconscious mind. So we remember our past lives and we remember our life between lives as a soul in between our physical incarnations. That sounds like heaven to me. So getting to the PDF by S.Mandelker. We're just going to go through this quick because this episode's already very long and it's already been very detailed. All right. Approximately 705,000 years ago, extensive Maldek wars creates Maldek souls metaphysical, astral, not of fear. They blew their planet up, I think with nuclear energy weapons. 600,000 years ago, Confederation spiritual healing of Maldek population souls on inner 3D planes. That's time-space, where we go in between space-time physical incarnations. 500,000 years ago, destruction of third density Maldek, and now that's our current asteroid belt, actually. Soul transfer to Earth into Bigfoot second density bodies. They did that as a form of karmic restitution, having their third density consciousness in the second density Bigfoot bodies to pay off karma and so they wouldn't blow up this planet too. Additionally, at 500,000 years ago, Earth hosting only second density life, mineral, plant, and animal kingdoms. At that point, there was no native third density human soul groups yet. Again, this is 500,000 years ago. Eventually, the highest second density animal groups became bipedal, meaning third density Homo sapiens, and became ensouled. Then we get into early human civilization from 75,000 years ago to 25,000 years ago. 75,000 years ago, final destruction of Mars civilization / atmosphere, soul transfer into third density Earth bodies, beginning of human civilization and the beginning of the third density evolution of planet Earth and mind-body-spirit complexes here. The soul mixture then was 50% Martian souls, 25% Earth native souls. That means they graduated from second density here on Earth, so probably things like trees, whales, dolphins, and other plants and animals that are super conscious compared to some of the other ones, and 25% other third density souls. That means 25% from other third density planets where they didn't blow their planet up or destroy their ability to live on the planet, but where they flunked out of their 75,000 year third density cycle, and then they came to Earth at the very beginning of our third density cycle as a form of 3D repeating. The repetition of third density, another 75,000 years to try to graduate to either fourth density positive or fourth density negative. Confederation, Yahweh, aid to Martian souls, genetic cloning to sharpen senses, strength, and mind. A light quarantine intensified around Earth. Yahweh action, human lifespan back then was 900 years. Imagine that. Then I'm not going to read all these bullet points because there's a bunch of extra stuff in here and we're just talking mostly about Maldek and Mars and our unique soul combination on Earth right now and why that is a big part and why Earth has been having so many wars and so much destruction, and now we're moving potentially towards World War III or nuclear holocaust. 46,000 years ago, there was a spiritual calling from Earth Maldek souls in the form of Bigfoot second density chemical bodies, and then they got Confederation aid in the form of sending love light. So I'll also mention as well that in our 75,000 year master cycle, which again we're coming very near to the very end of, we started off our 3D evolution here with Martian souls, Earth native souls, and other 3D souls from other planetary and systems in the galaxy. Then the Confederation did some genetic cloning to the Martian souls. Then Maldek souls incarnated first in Bigfoot bodies, and now most of them graduated from the second density Bigfoot body to the human body. And then the order of civilizations through Earth's 75,000 year cycle, master cycle. First we had Lemuria, which was a spiritually advanced, although technologically primitive group, which was destroyed by Earth's tectonic plate readjustment and flooding. Then the survivors migrated to places like Russia, North and South America, and other places. Then we had the Atlantean civilization begin. It was slow-growing and agrarian and conglomerate, but eventually the Atlanteans began a rapid intensification of their technological development in society. Unfortunately, the Atlanteans destroyed their civilization by nuclear crystal energy warfare, and their civilization ended too. And then around 9,600 years ago, that's final Earth changes and sinkings of Atlantean land masses, a direct result of warfare. So, the present combination of souls on Earth have a big, long, intense history of warfare and of malevolence and of service to self moral orientation. Or more appropriately, the elites were service to self. The elites, the very maybe 1% or 0.1%, the elites that are so good at service to self, they end up controlling civilization. They end up with all the influence, power, and control, and they want to have wars and enslavement of others. Why? Because it's how you graduate in the service to self, negative polarity. Here we find ourselves today on present-day Earth, with all these history of violent and malevolent souls from Mars and from Maldek, who incarnated on Earth, and then in Atlantis, a lot of those souls were piling on more and more negative karma. And so here we are, and I am in the United States, and a lot of people call the United States the new Atlantis. And guess what? We could be at the brink of destroying our civilization just like Atlantis did, just like the Martians did, and just like the Maldekians did. This group of souls, this combination of 3D repeaters from our solar system and from other solar systems, is very unique, very atypical in this galaxy, and I would assume in other galaxies as well. So there you have it. If you tell people that aren't hip to this type of stuff what you learned in this episode, they're going to think you are so crazy. What? There are Martian souls here? There's Maldekian souls, whatever the hell Maldek is? Ancient Atlantis was real? Mars destroyed their atmosphere? Maldek was a planet, and now it's the asteroid belt because they blew it up? We've got billions and billions and billions of people here now, and the vast majority of people are not even Earth natives. And even if they are Earth natives, you're telling me that we used to be plants and animals and minerals, and before that, earth, air, fire, and water? Get out of here. What are you smoking? Anyways, I can't get enough of the Law of One, and it's my privilege, honor, duty to learn this stuff to you. Pretty trippy stuff, right? This episode ended up being much longer than I had originally intended, but I'm very glad it did because this is such a important topic, and it's so interesting, and it's such novel information that, like I said at the beginning, hardly anybody in the world knows this stuff. Even a lot of people that have studied the Law of One don't go this deep into it, so they don't have all these little minute details and timelines and statistics. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you look down at the description box of this video, I'll have links to the 3 different resources that I used: the Raw Contact Resource Series Concept Guide, the lawof1.info website on the sections that have quotes from the Law of One books on Mars and Maldek, and the S.Mandelker Ph.D. authored PDF on Earth and ET Contact, A Brief History, timeline of pre-human civilization, early human civilization, Mars, Maldek, and much more. Thanks so much for going on this journey with me today. I had a blast making this and presenting this for you. I want to thank from the bottom of my heart the 3 individuals that made the Raw Contact possible. Mine is Carla Ruckert, the Telepathic Trance channel, Don Elkins, who was the questioner, and Jim McCarty, who was the scribe for the contact, and it took all three of them for the raw contact to be possible, not just with each of their skills, but also their energetic vibrations and also their harmony as a triad. Additionally, I want to thank Gary Bean and Diana Roy of LL Research, who came along later to the nonprofit organization, but who have added their own wonderful gifts and talents and time and energy to the llresearch.org website, as well as created that fantastic book, the Raw Contact Resource Series Concept Guide. And a big thank you as well to S.Mandelker Ph.D. I've probably listened to more than 500 hours of his lectures on his YouTube channel, which is named TWS Mandelker, which is short for Talks with Scott Mandelker. And I want to thank Scott as well for his Earth and ET Contact Brief History PDF, and for his YouTube channel, and all of his Law of One raw material playlists. Because when I first was introduced to the first book of the Law of One, I was actually listening to the Audible, and within, I'm not sure, maybe the first 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe even sooner, maybe even the first 10 minutes, I can't recall. I think it was probably within the first 30 minutes, I started crying tears of joy because I just knew that I had finally, after so many years of reading spiritual and metaphysical books, I had finally found the one that I had been looking for. When the student is ready, the teacher will come. And learning the Law of One has been so life-changing, so fulfilling, so validating, and so helpful for me to become a much happier, healthier, kind, loving, and awakened mind-body-spirit complex here in third density. The Law of One also taught me about the concept of wanderers, and coming to find out that I really resonate with the wanderer information, it really gave me this knowing, this validation that all of my life, all the pain and suffering and alienation and psychological issues and physical issues and not fitting in and drug addiction and attempted suicide and not fitting in with society and being like the odd person out with all my friend groups. I always knew there was something different about me, but I never thought that it could be that I was an ET soul. That is, a soul from a different density and a different planet than an Earth native or 3D native soul. Now, of course, I don't know for sure, but I've been so obsessed about the Law of One and raw material and the Wanderers topics for so many years that I would be very surprised if I wasn't a wanderer. When I was thinking about what topic to do for the video today, I thought about many different things and none of them got me jazzed up at all. I was on the way home from a 30-minute drive, and when I was a few blocks away from home, I got the idea I could do an episode on the history of Mars and Maldek and how a lot of the souls here on Earth are from there, and how right now we've got a very hostile civilization that's on the brink of war. Well, there's actually a lot of war going on. Could be on the brink of World War III. And as soon as I thought of this topic of Mars and Maldek, instantly I looked up in the car in front of me at the last 3 digits on the license plate said 444. That felt like such an affirmation from my subconscious mind, most likely, or maybe from my higher self or Ra. I think usually that's subconscious, though. And then, as soon as I got home, I saw that S.Mandelker had a new video that he posted last night, and in the last half of that video, he talks about Mars and Maldek. And he had a cool quote from that too. Quote, "World War III from the folks that brought you Mars and Maldek," end quote. And I just thought it was such a double synchronicity. I saw the number 444 instantly when I thought of Mars and Maldek. Then I came home, and S.Mandelker had done an episode where literally the last entire half of the episode, around 30 minutes long, was all about exactly what this topic today was about. And that was the double confirmation. And so, yeah, this has been a really fun episode to make. I'll shut up now. Have a good one, and take good care of yourself.
So, okay, World War III, from the folks who brought you Mars and Maldek, is moving right along. And if you look at the faces of these military people, the political people, particularly the Western side, they're incorrigible. This is what service to self at base of being looks like. In those faces, you may see souls who are service to self at base of being, meaning by higher self. This is, the dregs of the sector. This is what the Logos hath wrought. What hath you wrought, Logos? You have wrought this. No one should be confused. This is God's doing. And God is, with the Creator is all things, right? All is one. Okay. The Logos wants to allow the free will of itself in the form of 3D repeater, negatively oriented 3D repeaters who've been doing this on multiple planets. Yeah. They go to multiple planets, and in their quest to polarize to 4D negative or harvest, polarize negative and harvest to 4D negative, they end up blowing up planets and warring and destroying land mass and bodies and buildings and polluting and all that. And the Logos is just fine with it, seems to me. And yes, there's higher purpose to it, and the Logos is just fine with it too. So that's the Taoist phrase, the Zhenren, the superior man or the sage, sees all people as straw dogs. Bodies are to be sacrificed to soul evolution. Worlds are simply vehicles and tools used by the Logos for the Logos in the form of human bodies with the consciousness and identity as a little human man and woman, particularly those that are on the negative side, to scrape and scrabble and fight to try to enter the heavenly demon community, the community of heavenly asuras. To join the asura community, they have to do what they're doing. And Ra said it's normal that 3D worlds with mixed harvest planets, meaning positive and negative, include that have a sort of a tumultuous cycle-ending experience. The cycle end of 3D worlds of mixed harvest of population souls, both positive and negative at base. Commonly, these 3D cycles end like this, in a messy way. I don't think Mars and Maldek blew up at the end of cycles particularly, but it could be. They had many cycles, it seemed, both of them. And I don't know, their destruction tied to, did it occur at the end of one of their 3D cycles? Maybe. Certainly, Maldek stretched over many cycles. They were just warring continually for multiple cycles. So that's what we've got here, okay? Those are from the folks who brought you Mars and Maldek. We have World War III starting in Europe. Now, how far it'll go, I don't know, obviously. But there are all sorts of things, and I wouldn't be surprised, just a little heads up for those who are aware of the other issue called Blue Beam, and the weaponization of UFO ET contact, the co-optation of that phenomenon to support New World Order, One World Government, and all that, bringing all that in. Project Blue Beam, the fake alien invasion and fake alien salvation, fake alien disclosure, basically, fake ET disclosure. That was, I believe, where I was put on the list, on the red list, maybe not the red one, but one of them. It does seem my prediction as a possibility, not certainty, is that if the West, if this World War III thing escalates, which it seems to appear to do in Eastern Europe, centered at this point in Russia, Ukraine, Poland, Belarus, Moldova, Transnistria, Romania, Baltics, all supported by Western Europe, US, UK, and the Russian side with Belarus supported by China, Iran. If the West, how far it'll go, I don't know. Will it go to mega nuke, deployment? I don't know. But I wouldn't be surprised if the West pulls that card, the last card, the last final card, as Carol Rosin said. And you end up, so while Eastern Europe, Central Europe burns, and while Russia took some hits, they're clearly winning, and Europe is in poverty and in disorder greater than now. Then they pull the final card, and news reports are flooded with reports of big ass UFOs hovering over cities. Oh, just like one of those movies or several of those movies. And breathlessly, the honest mainstream media tells us honestly the real truth. They say that these ships are here and we don't know what they want. And urgently, our glorious world leaders meet in the citadel of justice called United Nations with Rockefeller territory or land donation. And in their glorious, beneficent, loving parent way, East and West capitulate, or East capitulates to the West in the common defense of our planet. We will put aside our differences, and everybody must come together, or we're coming together, or we'll call a ceasefire and a truce. To save our bacon, we'll release the made on Earth ships, something like that. To save our bacon, and to prevent the Maginot Line of protection against all-out Euro collapse in the condition of an escalated Eastern European, Central European, moving West European war loss scenario. The West pulls that card, and then China-Russia capitulates and basically says, oh, yes, oh, yes, these are real, and maybe they will be. I don't think that it would be, but I don't think Orion will let themselves be used that way, and the Confederation surely wouldn't. But the West may play that final card, said Werner von Braun and Carol, when to pull their chestnuts from the fire, to save their bacon, as they say. Bacon is good, should be saved as well. So that may be when they play that final card, if that is final card. And I'm absolutely certain that the East will say, okay, no problem, we'll go along with this. Then what? Well, then you have a whole new. You have some kind of cementing of global governance, East and West reconciliation, and some kind of settlement of unified global geofinance, or a financial, one world bank, one world government, one world army, and all that. Something closer to that. I don't think they can ever get to it, frankly. They're just too disagreeable, all of them. But that may be when that card is pulled, if it is. And they're clearly preparing for that, or keeping it available. It's basically like there may never be a fire over there, but we train for it regularly. Or there may never be a fire again in the city, but we continue with our exercises. like that to prepare to, put out fires. So likewise, they may never use it, but they're clearly continuing the preparation to use it if necessary. The false alien disclosure. And in class, a friend mentioned that a NASA head or administrator or some flunky along the way saying that within 3 years or 5 years there'll be some kind of ET exposure, disclosure, presentation, arrival, something. So they clearly keep moving with that theme. How far it goes, we don't know.